The Big H Podcast, tune in now. Conversations that'll wow. Laugh and learn, stay a while. Let's explore that Hilton style. From the highs to the lows, every story just explodes. Mike's got questions on the go, diving deep from head to toe. Every week the guests align, sharing moments so divine. Stay with us, the pace is fine. Every episode you'll find. The Big H Podcast, tune in now. Conversations that'll wow. Laugh and learn, stay a while. Let's explore that Hilton style.
Good evening, and I'm here with Conversations with Crumb with our Village of Hilton and Parma historian, Mr. Dave Crumb. Dave, it's great to have you back from your vacation.
Thank you very much, Mike. Good to be back.
Tonight's episode, we're going to focus around Old Hojack Drive or Road. Dave, before we get going, all I remember when I was growing up and the railroad would go through the village, we'd go and watch the train, and it was like a real cool thing. And we'd put a penny on the track, and after the train went by, we'd go pick it up, and it was like flat as a pancake.
Yeah.
But it's made a lot of changes since then, and looking forward to hearing about the history and some good stories about it. So take it away.
Okay. Well, thanks, Mike. Good to be back. And I also put pennies on the railroad when I was a kid. I think just about every kid did. And somewhere around, I've got one of those pennies that's flat, and it's about the size of a quarter. I guess it's illegal, but somehow we ended up doing that sort of thing. Unfortunately, the Hojack is no more. It closed in 1978, I believe. It had about a 102-year run. But the Hojack really is what made Hilton, and that's what I want to get into tonight. The arrival of the Hojack, or what the real name was the Rome, Watertown, and Oswego Railroad, known as the RW&O. And it came to Hilton, and it opened in 1876. Right after the Civil War, there was a lot of activity in building railroads to connect cities all over the United States. And New York was certainly one of those states that benefited from that. So, to begin, the railroad really started out as the Lake Ontario Shore Railroad. And that was the very first effort, started back in 1871. However, the Panic of 1873, which was a depression of that era, caused the organization to go bankrupt. And many of the folks in our area here lost money because they put money up to create bonds to finance the railroad and show support. And there was one man who really is kind of called the father of the Hojack, and his name is Charles Effner. Maybe some of you know or have heard of Effner Drive in Hilton and wondered how that name came about. Well, it's because of Charles Effner. He was a local man, and he only had one arm. And people thought he'd lost it in the Civil War, but that was not the case. He lost his arm down at the Hiscock sawmill down on Braddock's Bay.
Can I stop you real quick? So
Yes.
he was in the war then?
No, he was not in the war.
Right.
No, not in the war, but he was working down at this sawmill where Braddock's Bay Hotel is, and somehow had that unfortunate accident, but that didn't stop him from being an active citizen. And Effner, through his political efforts, had the line moved north to go through Unionville, which of course was Hilton, and it would serve the farms that were closer to Lake Ontario. How he did that is quite a story, and I'll try to make it short. Effner saw the need for this railroad to help the farmers in the area. Unionville was out in the middle of nowhere, right up close to the lake, we didn't really have a lot of shipping going on out of Lake Ontario, at least near Hilton. We did out of Charlotte. So it was very difficult for farmers to get their crops to a good market. Horse and a wagon full of produce could go about 7 or 8 miles in a day and then get home.
Mm-hmm.
And so your markets were limited. You might get into Rochester, but once the Hojack came, farmers could put their products on the train and they could be shipped to New York and even as far as Europe. And Europe is where a lot of our apples went during a certain era. Anyway, after the Panic of 1873 and the collapse of the Lake Ontario Shore Railroad, it was Effner who came in and went to the farmers and said, listen, we've got to get something going here. And so the Rome, Watertown, and Oswego Company bought the deflated stock, the defunct Lake Ontario Shore Railroad, and commenced completing the railroad line with new investors, and Effner was one of them. There were many of the local farmers who supported it, but originally the railroad was supposed to go through Parma Center, being the center of the township. However, Effner saw that it would be better for the farms down closer to the lake to have the railroad going through Unionville.
Mm-hmm.
And so he realized that farms south of Peck Road in Parma could get their products up to Spencerport and use the New York Central up there. Well, part of the story is the board of directors for the Rome, Watertown, and Oswego Railroad consisted of 13 members. 5 were in Oswego, 3 between Oswego and the Genesee River, and then 5 between the Genesee River and the Niagara River. And control was in Oswego, because back in those days there was no telephone, no TV, no radio, or automobile. You were really, communication was very difficult. We did have telegraph, but the officials were located in Oswego, and they were kind of doing what they wanted to do. And Charles Effner here in Unionville realized this. And so he got busy and contacted all the board members that were between Oswego and the Genesee, and then the ones between the Genesee and Niagara River, and garnered their support for a vote to move the tracks north to Unionville. And you can really see what happened to Parma Center. It never grew. It's still probably just about the same size it was back in 1876, and perhaps a little bit smaller. On another note, too, Charles Effner had a general store in Hilton. That general store stood where the Rexall drugstore is on the corner of Lake Avenue and Main Street in the village. So, the railroad opened in August of 1876. That was the most exciting thing that happened probably through the 1870s in Parma. There was a great celebration held in Unionville. People came from all over to see the first train pass through town. Cora Stoddard Butcher was the first person to ride on the train. She was 16, and her uncle, Mr. Wheeler, was the engineer on the locomotive, and he made it possible for her to be up there riding with him. And in old age, Cora would write about this in articles in the Hilton Record. Carrie Curtis Smith bought the first ticket to ride into Rochester, and it was 26 cents. She had to go buy her wedding dress. And she and James K. Smith were to be married on September 8, 1876. So she only had about 2 weeks to get her wedding gear in line. She was the great-grandmother of Doug Hurlbut. 2 other men had a hand in the building of the railroad. They were 2 brothers newly arrived from Canada, Evan and Alan Fraser. Evan had the contract to lay the tracks from Charlotte to Kendall Corners, a line of about 18 miles. Alan had the job as front man to visit local farmers and tell them that the line was going to go through their farm, and would they please sign over right of way, or eminent domain would proudly come in and take it over anyway. Both of them were successful in their work. Evan was a favorite with the Irish railroad workers, as he could joke with them in Gaelic, their native language. Alan was a bright, intelligent personality and got along with the local farmers, who mostly all signed off for the right of way, realizing that they would improve their livelihood, being able to sell their farm products to distant markets, even as far away as Europe. And in Europe, oftentimes our Parma apples went that far. When the railroad work was done, there was no more work for the Fraser brothers. Evan left for the oil fields of Pennsylvania, where he obtained a job as the paymaster. And there were new-found oil wells down there, and that's where all the action was at that particular time. It was down around Titusville. Alan, however, had fallen in love with a local girl from Unionville named Ella Wayne, and he wanted to stay. He was backed by a local farmer named Mr. John Tennyson. And in partnership with Elam Cross, Alan opened a general store on the corner of Main Street and South Avenue. The partnership lasted a year. It was not big enough to support two families, so Fraser bought out Cross. Soon after, Evan returned to Hilton and joined his brother as partner, forming the company of Fraser Brothers General Store. This business venture rode the wave of prosperity that the railroad created for the village and lasted until 1941. The first store moved to Main Street and was much enlarged. After a fire in 1903 that destroyed that store, a new one was built and opened in March of 1904. That building was destroyed in the fire of 1965. At one time, it was known as the largest department store in a village the size of Hilton anywhere in western New York. And it also included a bank, and known at the time as Fraser's Bank, and it was a private bank, and later was reorganized as the State Bank of Hilton, and today this bank is the forerunner of Hilton's M&T Bank. So the farmers profited greatly from the railroad. They were able to get their crops to distant markets, which was very profitable. This created more jobs for village people. Many dry houses were built out in the countryside to preserve the apples. They would dry the apples so that they could be used at a later date without any deterioration. Peck and Pratt came to Hilton, and it was later sold to Smithfield's canning factory, and they processed apples to make canned applesauce and other products related to apples. H.J. Heinz Company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, built a vinegar plant at the end of Heinz Street, now known as Omega Tool and Die. This Heinz plant created a tremendous amount of employment for people in Hilton, for young men and women who didn't want to leave the area, chose to make Hilton their home. Also on the Hojack line, there was passenger service from 1876 up until 1934. You could buy a ticket and ride into Rochester. There was a train that went in the morning and it would come back in the afternoon, bringing the people back. People could get a job in town if they could meet the train schedule, or if their job would meet the train schedule. But a lot of people just like to go into shop and see the sights. That ended in 1934 due to the advent of the automobile. Everybody had a car by then, and there was just not enough demand. So the last train through Hilton was in 1978. The trains ran usually one in the morning and one at night. They ran from all the way from Oswego all the way to Lewiston up the Niagara River. Some of you may have seen that sign on Hojack Lane. It's kind of a post, and it says P104, I believe. And a lot of people don't know what that is, but it means glass guy 104 miles. And there was one of these signs every mile along the Hojack line, so you could see how far away you were from your wherever you were going.
Just to stop, how long did it take to construct the railroad?
Well, that's a good question. I would say probably from 1871 until it opened in 1876, and that was going all the way from Rome, Watertown, Oswego, all the way up to Lewiston, and it was slow work back in those days. It was a lot of hand digging. You had horses, mules, just a lot of manpower I think they had cranes to lift the tracks. The men would they'd grade the bed with rocks and crushed stone, and then they'd lay the railroad ties, and then they would have to put the tracks on, and then they'd have men come in with a sledgehammer and take those great big they're more than nails, spikes, and nail them down. I know that in a lot of the railroad history, they talked about when they united the two railroads going east and west that reached the Pacific and the Atlantic. When they met in the middle, they had gold spikes, and they nailed those. That was part of the celebration. I never heard of anything like that.
One more quick question. I'll let you get back to your script here. You said that the automobile ended up taking over for the train. How fast did the trains go when they were first developed?
Well, not
Any
very
idea?
fast.
Yeah.
Not very fast. I would say as they went through town, they might be going. I think they kind of slowed down as you went through a town because there were a lot of accidents on the road. I can think of several people that were killed over the years that I've heard about. They didn't have these railroad crossings that we have now. Later, they put in, the bars that would go down that we see today. But you had to be pretty careful. Anybody that was deaf couldn't hear the train coming. They might go through and bang. There were various accidents in all the towns along, and often the trains would hit cattle out in the farmers' fields. And there's a gentleman by the name of Captain Ruggles from Charlotte. It just comes to mind, and he invented a snowplow, also kind of like a cow catcher. And they had these cow catchers on the front of the train that were shaped like a spade, so that if the train went along and caught a cow, wouldn't kill the cow. It would scoop him up and throw him off into the side field, and hopefully the cow could get up and walk away. That's if they weren't going too fast. So those were the cow catchers. And then this Captain Ruggles took off on that, and he developed a snowplow. Also one that had a fan on it, so that it acted like a snowblower as they're going along. It was connected to steam. And a local resident in our area here, Miles Bliss, has the models that this Captain Ruggles developed for that. He was a local man.
I think it's a good topic for Jerry Pickett to put in his Moments of Hilton History.
Yes, that is. Yeah.
I apologize to get you off track. To get you off track, pun intended.
We think of these things as we go along, and sometimes those questions bring up something we hadn't put into the overall plan. Okay, there's a couple more little things on the Hojack. A lot of people say, how did that Hojack name originate? And there are several opinions on that. A couple here that I'll share with you are that there was a farmer somewhere along the line, and his mule, whose name was Jack, began to chase the train down the track. And the farmer yelled out, "Whoa, Jack, whoa!" And it morphed into Hojack, and that stuck. Another opinion is that when locomotive engineers passed each other, they yelled out the window to each other, "Hojack" or "Hi, Jack," because all engineers back then were called Jack. They all waved to each other. And so those are just a couple of opinions that have been noted. But the Hojack really it made Hilton what it was from probably 1876 to let's say 1976, it created an economy here in the community. Um, all West Avenue had only houses on the south side of the road. In 1880, the whole line of houses were built from Lake Avenue up to Henry Street. They all look very similar in architecture. And houses were built up and down Lake Avenue. Gorton Avenue was established. There was a lot of activity. As I mentioned, the Fraser brothers had great success with their store, but they weren't the only ones. Johnny Cooper came to town. The town was growing. Prior to the Hojack, all Unionville was a little village of retired farmers who wanted the convenience of living near a store and getting close to church, where they could go to church and not have to be driving their rigs into town, 5-6 miles away. So it really, the impact of the railroad was amazing. And Hilton or Unionville, which later became North Parma, and that was another Hojack little story. North Parma originally was down where Bartlett's Corners is, or the intersection of 259 and Curtis Road. On the maps, that's known as North Parma, which is exactly what it is, the North community in Parma. Well, there's a man named William Barrage down there who was the postmaster of North Parma. But after the railroad came to Hilton, he moved his post office up to the village. And they were getting the mail all mixed up. And so they, instead of Unionville, they renamed the town North Parma. And it didn't take a whole lot of action to do that. Everybody says the right thing to do, just do it. And so it became North Parma. And then in 1896, they needed to change North Parma to something else because we had North Parma, Parma Center, Parma Corners, and people not from this area were getting all mixed up with their mail and with train schedules and where they wanted to get off. So they voted at that time to change the name to Hilton, which was after a departing Baptist minister named Charles Augustus Hilton, who was quite popular among the folks in town. And he was leaving for another calling in Michigan, I believe. And so they said this to honor him, they called the village Hilton. And there's never been another initiative to change the name to anything else. So it'll probably stay Hilton forever. Well, that's about it, I guess, on the Hojack, unless you've got more questions, Mike.
Just a real brief one. Through working for the Historical Society, you want to reach out to the younger kid. Mm-hmm. If you had maybe one or two things, you might have already referenced them in your presentation today. What's one or two takeaways from the railroad that you think should stick in a young kid's mind, an elementary kid, and middle school?
Well, it was always fun for me as a kid to watch the trains going by. I was brought up in a house 3 houses down from the Baptist church right on Lake Avenue. And when the train went through, the whole house shook and the windows rattled. It didn't do any damage, but there was a rumble in the town. And I can remember that. And now kids today won't have that experience. I guess when you're sitting at a track and a train goes by, you're up close, you can feel that rumble going through. But this was amazing. It just went right up the street, and we took it for granted. I mean, it didn't upset anybody, but it sticks in my mind. Another thing, let me think.
Well, I think maybe as you think, we try to teach kids, about economy.
Yeah.
And when they hear the word economy, they don't necessarily think of money.
It's about jobs.
Mm-hmm.
It's about people making a living. And before the Hojack came through, everybody was a farmer, lived on a farm, or worked on somebody else's farm, and there wasn't much for people to do.
Mm-hmm.
And people liked the area and they wanted to stay, but if they couldn't make a living, they had to move somewhere else where they were needed. But when the Hojack came through, it let people have jobs so they could remain in the community. And so you might have 3 generations or 4 generations of a family still in town and that helped create family. Otherwise, you're moving west to distant places in order to support yourself. So I guess that's a good point to think of. The Hojack Railroad created a tremendous economy that lasted about 100 years for Hilton. After that, of course, Kodak was growing, and everybody in Hilton began to work at Kodak and other places in Rochester. And nowadays, our school system creates economy in Hilton. We have a very large school system, and it creates lots of jobs for people. And then we have small businesses, and still the farmers are here. And the town has changed a lot, but there's still a lot of things that are much the same here in the community. Lots of the same families, lots of people that know each other, and so yeah, economy's very important. You'll find out as you get older.
But and I also, this is just maybe a personal opinion, I like that approach that it helped create a sense of family at that time, and I think that's desperately needed at any time in human history, and it was great that we had the railroad to do that.
Yeah, I don't think people realize that implication of it, but it let people stay home.
Mm-hmm.
My grandfather was able to stay here in town, and he was from Canada, and if it hadn't been for the Hojack, he'd have had to go back up there and find something else to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was able to marry this girl in town and be prosperous and create family. I probably wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for the Hojack.
Mm-hmm.
And as a kid, I always heard about that. It really was like a spark plug in this area here. It just was like I don't know, a rebirth or something. The town just blossomed out, and poor Parma Center did not. It still existed, and they got along okay, but they didn't have the pleasure of prosperity like we did in the village of Hilton.
Well, Dave, I really appreciate you bringing this topic to light, and I know our audience will appreciate it, and we look forward to bringing other topics in the near future. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And this has been Conversations with Crumb. I've been your host, Mike Heiss, and we'll talk to you real soon.
The Big H Podcast, tune in now. Conversations that'll wow. Laugh and learn, stay a while. Let's explore that Hilton style. From the highs to the lows, every story just explodes. Mike's got questions on the go, diving deep from head to toe. Every week the guests align, sharing moments so divine. Stay with us, the pace is fine. Every episode you'll find. The Big H Podcast, tune in now. Conversations that'll wow. Laugh and learn, stay a while. Let's explore that Hilton style.